Hey guys, and welcome back to the INSITE channel. Today we have MightyMax in the Crosshair. The captain of Endpoint has dominated the UK scene for years and has produced some of the best talents outside of the UK scene that the world's ever seen. But before we get any further, how are you doing today?
I'm good. First off day in a while, but I'm happy to be here to answer your questions.
Yeah, I mean, like you guys have had some grind for the last like 6 months. But before we kind of get to that stage, something I always like to ask just to break the ice is like, how did you get into CS? How were you introduced to competitive CS alongside just the game itself?
Getting into Counter Strike, it was watching my older brother play like 1.6, I think it was. This was a long time ago. But when it came to like the competitive side, I really didn't know there was one until the latter stages of CS Source. But like slightly before CS:GO was announced, so it must have been maybe like 2012, 2011, I want to say. But yeah, we just ended up playing as friends, more so in CS:GO. But there was a little bit towards the end of Source that I played competitively anyway. But even that level of play that we were doing was like really low, quite casual playing. But yeah, when it came to CS:GO, it was we actually our like friend group quit playing Counter Strike. We were playing actually League of Legends for a long time because my internet was so bad, and I think everyone just enjoyed playing League because it was so new, right? And then we went to a I don't remember what Insomnia it was. It was when it was back in the Rika arena, I think. And we saw that everyone was still playing CS:GO, and the people that we knew from Source and stuff were all playing. And then we made a group choice basically to swap back over, and then we started playing. I think it was like 2014 we started playing, maybe 2013. I think it was the ESL one Cologne, the first one, the I think NIP one, right? So I remember we all watched that, and then we all kind of got back into playing CS:GO. It was quite fun, and then obviously here we are now.
Yeah, there's like a whole like 10-year cycle. But for you as like a UK player to look at like playing professionally, was this something that maybe wasn't as apparent of an idea because we didn't have many of those UK players at the top? Like there weren't people to necessarily look at, whereas like now we have like even you guys and like Mezzi and stuff like that, we could look at that. But for you when you were coming up, was that thought of playing professional less apparent because of like the scene being less developed?
I would say so. Like when I was playing even Counter Strike Source, and even when we came back to CS:GO, there were kind of big UK names. Like people always spoke about like Rattlesnake,
Mm.
Release, like all these people that used to play the game, or maybe they still did at the time. I don't really recall. But I don't think they actually did play when I started playing. But then it was like it was more about playing for fun than it was trying to go pro. And then I realized at a point that actually um, it could be like a career path sort of thing. Like it didn't feel like I was trying to go pro the whole time. We were having
Yeah.
fun and we were getting good results. And then all of a sudden we were kind of known. Like I think we were called. It must have been like Choke Gaming back in the day. Like when we first started playing together, we were all friends, but the results we got made us more known in the UK scene. And then after that, like everyone wanted to play with us, wanted to like play face it and mixed teams and like the fish 1 2 3s and stuff. That's why I got involved in that. And then by playing more and more and having more fun and like meeting new people in the UK scene, I realized that actually it could be like something that I can do. It's like be professional, but I never thought I'd be an in-game leader. But yeah, it wasn't like something I actually tried to pursue. It just kind of happened, I think.
Okay, so I didn't realize that like Choke Gaming was actually like not maybe like a team, but it was just friends playing together. So how did you change almost like your mentality to the game when you would have left that Choke Gaming going into 2016 and like started playing more like in the UK scene? How did your perspective of that game change when you kind of almost like left your friendship group?
I mean, it was tricky because like um we tried to always remain in the same team, right? But then it became
Yeah.
apparent that like in the UK, everyone wanted to like play with you. Like everyone wanted to play with me, for example. And it was like, well, I didn't want to leave my team to play with people that I didn't really know and stuff, right? And then it got to the point where I think we ended up in Endpoint, sort of 2016, I want to say 2017. and we'd played like Gfinity. Still, like we were still friends. Like the core of the team was still friends, and then that's where we kind of it started being like more serious, right? Like who do we pick up? And we had people like Snods. We had like PT, for example, like an old CS player who was one of like the UK legends. We had Hard G player of us, and again one of these big names. So it was kind of weird for me because it was like we're playing with like these big names, and I was still quite young at the time. But still at that point, I didn't feel like we were playing professionally. We were getting paid to play, but it was like it wasn't enough to sustain you, like an actual job. Um, but yeah, after that endpoint team, like we kind of went our separate ways, and it was like, okay, what do we do? Because I think GFin had finished, the team kind of decided that was it. Like, there's no
Mm,
more of this team, right? And it was like, okay, well, what do we do? And I stayed in endpoint, so basically, endpoint's been my only team, like for the
mm.
majority of CS:GO, right? So for me, it's been a bit weird to build and constantly rebuild teams like that. But yeah, like it was definitely it's definitely weird going out of your comfort zone. Obviously, playing with friends and then playing with people that you maybe you've spoke to at LAN, or maybe you've met them before, but it's like they weren't really close friends. But yeah, it's something that you have to overcome, especially with the UK scene the way it was at the time. That's kind of why Endpoint was always like it was at some point 5 UK, but then sometimes it was like 4 UK plus one sort of European player, or 3 UK plus two, or 2 UK plus three, right? So that's kind of why, it's because the development of the UK scene kind of slowed down, or it would have been, in our opinion, too difficult to kind of build someone up so quickly. Whereas European players generally have a better foundation than UK players. But I think nowadays that's not necessarily the case. Like that's why obviously we picked up a Zulu. We still do have European players, of course, but I think that the UK scene's actually in a good place right now.
Yeah, there's actually so much to pick apart from basically what you said, and I think it's all going to be based around like development of UK. And I think I want to start with you were saying like when you were playing in Source, or no, like yeah, there was like all these big names in Source, and the UK scene, especially early Go, like actually had an international platform, but then that all slowed down, I guess, kind of when you were almost on that come up. Like what, and like we hit that trough between maybe like 2020 when like all the play went for Valorant, and when you started there was like that trough of UKCS where internationally it wasn't as apparent. Why do you think there was that lack of development? And especially for you guys, like when you won your first EPS, you had to play with Fasha. Well, you didn't have to play, but like you were playing with Fasha. Like, why did we hit that trough of UKCS, do you think?
It's difficult, right? Obviously, the latter stages, I think Valorant is kind of the what happened for the
Yeah.
UK scene. Like there was always Endpoint and Vex, and we were always like quite close battling it out, right? And then Valorant came, and sort of it felt like everyone, like the most of the players from Vexed went to Valorant, and then like a lot of the players that were sort of below that in the UK scene, but still competing in like ESL Prems and stuff, they all kind of moved over to like get a new chance, right? So that thing that really gutted the UK scene, because some players still stuck around, but it wasn't apparent kind of how the effect would be like so
Yeah.
years on, right? But before that, when it was like Gfinity and stuff, I don't remember like the reason why. I think it was just we thought that the European players were better. But that being said, um, I think it was because it must have been because of Gfinity, because Gfinity was being hosted in London, and then um, there was obviously European teams in there, and we thought that, okay, well, we should try and get some talented players in that can play, and we all the UK teams were sort of picking up all the UK players, so we had sort of team infused that I think were like pretty much all UK. Maybe there was like one European player. Um, there was like Team Prophecy that were getting European players, and there was a bunch of like I think Method were in it, and they were getting UK players. So like our pool of UK players was so limited to choose from that it was like we should just go with European player. That's why we ended up playing with Fascia and YNC, I think it
It
was.
was so I didn't recognize the guy, but he was German.
Yeah, I don't remember exactly what the roster was at the time, but yeah, I think that's the reason why it went that way. But whereas now, like we've kind of endpoint has gone back to a UK route, like kind of more of a traditional endpoint, where it's actually a UK majority. But yeah, that's that.
Yeah, because you were talking about like developing players, and I think something that it was quite apparent you guys had maybe like an issue with was when you were replacing like in 2021 and 2020 with like the Thomases leaving and all these like fifth player losing. It was like we can't go UK because there's no rifler that's like next
Yeah.
up. And then out of nowhere, like in last year, like the selection has just exploded. Like you've got so many different players. Why do you feel like that development now compared to before has changed and we actually see like a lot more younger players rising up?
Honestly, I don't know what really happened. I think when Valorant came out, all the players that were sort of more known in the UK
Yeah.
seemed to have quit or moved game. But then maybe it gave room for people that weren't so known to sort of shine. Um, but yeah, I don't even like. I've always been impressed with some players when we play ESL Prems, over the past 2 years. Like even the Viperio guys, I've always said how well they play as a team. Arctic Raptors are a good team. Azubu and XKLS, they were a good team, and good players. So it's like I always keep track of it. Um, but it's purely from ESL Prem from my perspective. But outside of that, I don't know what these teams and players are doing to build up their portfolio in terms of experience, right? It might just be ESCAs. It might be the more availability of tournaments on HLTV or just in general, like online tournaments. It could be that. 'Cause I think that really has helped tier two and beyond on CS. Is like the amount of TOs that are willing to put on tournaments, especially during the COVID era. Like it was insane. But even now, there's a lot of tournaments for people to play, regardless if it's on
Mm.
HLTV or not, right? So yeah, I think that's probably the main reasons. But I won't really know for sure
Yeah.
unless I ask them.
Yeah, I mean, oh yeah, because I guess there is like that difference of like you are just that like as endpoint just like that kind of like one level above. So it's like not always the constant mixing
Mm.
with like there's like that kind of that gap between the teams. But just kind of staying a little bit on like early UKCS when you were coming up in that. You've mentioned Gfinity and EPS was on LAN. That isn't a thing right now. Like now we have so little LANs. Like even ice series was like massive. Like you had such a big international name for iSeries. How important was it that we had all these different lands and all these different possibilities for players like you to improve and show yourself? And how much do you think that affects UKCS now that we don't have that?
Yeah, looking back at it, at the time, I didn't feel like it was important. It felt like
Yeah.
it was just fun, exciting, and it was like a challenge. But looking back at it, it actually was quite important because you had a mixture of different levels of Counter Strike sort of that you're being exposed to. So it was like when you go to an Insomnia, it was yeah, it's a LAN, but it's a LAN you want to win. You kind of have that bragging right in the UK. If you want an Insomnia, you're the best team in the UK, right? But also the land stage and stuff was kind of a step up from just BYOC. It was kind of, we're playing on stage, it's a crowd, regardless of how big or small it is, you go on stage, you're wearing headsets, etc. And then you go to an ESL Prem, and it was like a step up. It was like more professional. It was okay, this is how kind of tier one events do it. That you have to set up on media day. You have to, there's no internet on the PCs. There's special headsets you've got to wear, and it was like more eye opening for me than it was kind of exciting. It's like, oh, this is how the top teams play, even though it's just an ESL Prem, right? But that experience, I think, is actually what I spoke to a lot of the UK. We have the BCSA now in the UK, and like a lot of the teams want ESL Prems back on LAN because they haven't had that. Some of the players, right, or some of them
Yeah.
have had that, and they miss it. But hopefully this Insomnia ESL Prem runs pretty smoothly because it could be the first event back on the calendar for them. But yeah, I do think it's needed. Like it's definitely needed to have these sort of different experiences for players because it could be you don't want to pick up a player, for example, in Endpoint, and like they haven't been to a LAN, right? They don't know what it's like. Or maybe you would, but it's obviously not ideal for that player to then go to an event and be like, oh, I've never done this before. But I do think it's an experience that everyone should go through if they want to become a professional player.
Yeah, I think completely, yeah. And it makes your life easier to like with Endpoint picking up these guys who actually have that experience. And also another point you were touching on Valorant, because you was talking about how it was like you guys vexed and it was like there was actually that consistent level of competition which we didn't then have for a couple years. Did it as your team, when Valorant happened, did it almost and like we saw these like guys cross over, did you almost garner like a level of complacency where you weren't pushed to improve as much because you didn't have that like constant, almost like someone pushing you from the regional scene? Like you didn't have to improve at a drastic level.
Domestically, for sure. I think
Yeah.
I think that maybe not. We weren't overtly being complacent, but when it came to ESL Prems and there was no Vex, we're like, okay, well, this is going to be a walk in the park.
Yeah.
But like me being me, I was always trying to sort of tell everyone, it's not going to be super easy to win these. It never is, because that this is still when I think like Viperia were on the rise. I
Mm.
don't remember if Arctic Raptors were quite there yet, but
No, they're very
but
recent now.
um but yeah, like, there was still kind of these mixed teams that were they were like either mixed teams or teams about orgs, and I was like, well, right now we're number one on everyone's radar, right? They want to beat us more than we want to beat them, so we have to kind of, it's not going to be easy, and we have to try and, I say try, like, not say that we've already won the game before we've even played the game, right? And that's where you might see like some of these upset results in the best of ones, or we might have lost a map or a series, because like I think I think it's quite natural to become complacent when there's like you feel like there's less competition. But it also, if you're able to evaluate that, you can also become better. Do you know what I mean? Like
Yeah.
it's a weird cycle of that. But I think now like ESL Prem's in a really healthy place. A lot of the teams are competitive. People like even with standings or without standings, people give us a run for our money, right? So
Mm.
um, yeah, I think it's in a good spot right now.
Yeah. And okay, so I kind of want to bring it back a little bit and talk about you guys building Endpoint from that like 2017 point when you were first winning EPSs. Did you ever actually imagine that when you kind of won that first EPS in 2017, you guys and you especially would be the spearhead to Endpoint winning like 10 in total, 8 in a row? Like, was that ever something you quite imagined?
No. Like for me, ESL Prem was always like, yeah, we'll just play it. Like it's a UK tournament, we'll just play it. And then it was like we'd won two in a row, and it was three in a row, and then like it was then like I didn't even know we'd won so many until it was like we won five in a row, and it was like okay, and then like yeah, we just got to keep on winning. I was like, all right, we'll try. And then it's got to the point where we won like 10 or something. I was just like, or it's 8. I don't even know what we're at right now, but like
Yeah.
it wasn't really like something that was a goal for me. It's like Endpoint wants to play it. It's a UK tournament. Obviously, there's benefits to winning it with the like kind of the pro league
Yeah.
qualifier kind of thing. So for us, it was always going to be we're going to try to take it seriously. We're going to play to win, obviously, all the time. And it was just like we kept on winning it, and like with standings, without standings, we just kept on winning it. I think there was like 2 seasons we went unbeaten, and everyone thought that like no one else was ever going to win the ESL Prem. And I was just thinking we can't, like, obviously we can't carry this on for that to the end of time, right? We're going to lose at some point, and then obviously we lost last season, so
Yeah.
it is what it is.
Yeah, and so you were kind of like continuing that success, and we were starting to see like some actual familiar faces come like in the modern endpoints, like the likes of Thomas, the likes of Robin. They started playing with you. What was the reasons why you actually kept playing with these guys for so long? And like I think you said before that like the endpoint mentality was very different to other UK team mentality of like in the UK there was so much drama, and your team avoided that. Was this down to the players and the fact that like you guys were as a group so like almost different to everyone else?
I think I'd say so, yeah. Like the way it kind of all happened was I actually wasn't in Endpoint for like a 6 month period, because they tried to do a different project. So I
Yeah.
was actually teamless. And then what had happened was it was the WSG, I think it was. It was a qualifier, and then basically I messaged Surreal, I think at the time. It could have been Thomas. I don't remember. But I basically asked, "Do you want to play this?" Because they were actually they were in Epsilon, and the
Mm.
Epsilon were like a formidable team at the time, right? It was like a kind of a European. I think it definitely was a European team, but they'd been going through like roster changes, and it was like it was Thomas, it was Robin, it was Crucial, it was Surreal, and then it was like always like +1. I was like, do you want to play this qualifier? Because it was like I think you had to be majority UK to play it, like
Yeah.
the UK qualifier, right? So I was like, do you want to play it? Like, yeah, okay, we'll play it, and then we won it. And then after that, we joined Endpoint, and then I don't know really why it was like I think people perceive us to be like above the UK scene. We don't really talk to anyone, but I don't think that's the case. Like I just think that um, we just keep to ourselves. That's all it is. We just grinded the game. We don't really have time to be a part of like the drama. Get ourselves involved with the stupid stuff in UKCS. And obviously, a degree of it is also remaining professional. So it's like if you do see something, you're not gonna like just tweet about it. It's like we kind of held ourselves to a high standard. I think that's the reason why. Not so much that we don't like the UK scene or anything. It's just we just keep to ourselves. That's the only reason I can think of.
Okay, that's very interesting. And so with this, like, because you had a really rough stage as an individual in Endpoint in like 2019, and I think you've before literally described it as like a year of losing. When you formed back with this like Phoenix roster with like this whole new like basically what is modern Endpoint,
Mhm.
did this feel like a fresh start in your career as well? That like it's in Endpoint again, it's the same org, but with a completely different pieces. You have the Anaheim spot. Like, did it feel like a fresh start?
Yeah, to a degree, it was. It was still weird for me because, like, I think in 2019, that's when I first started in-game leading, really. So it was like a roller coaster of, I was like, what are we doing? The team results were so bad, and it was like I was dropped, and then we brought back in this new team, right? And like we figured out mid qualifier that like are cool for the team for this the WSG qualifier.
You
I was
found
like,
out mid
sure.
qualifier.
Well, we were like kind of mixing it, right? So everyone was kind of cool in, and I think um we played. I remember we played. I think it was like a double bracket, like to the lower bracket. We played Vexed, and we actually lost to them. I was like, we can't lose to Vex anymore. And so we dropped down, and then we kind of figured out. I was like, okay, well, there's too many calls. Who's gonna call? And everyone's like, yeah, Max just call. I was like, okay, I'll call. And then that's kind of where my IGLing really began. Like it kind of started in 2019, like an endpoint before this team, but it wasn't like I didn't take it that seriously. I didn't feel like it would be like a true role. Because I think I played with Impulse and AVN from Serbia, and like he was Impulse was the IGL at the time, and then after they went, I became the IGL for like maybe 4 or 5 months, right? So it's like a very short period. But then when there's like modern endpoint, I was the IGL from the start, right? So it was definitely a new start for me, and I was quite nervous in terms of can I fit in this team? Like I'm not an IGL. I didn't see myself as an IGL, but they want me to be an IGL. So I was like, I'll try my best. But then it kind of worked out. Like I
Yeah.
played with Crucial like years ago, so I knew him, but I'd never played with Surreal. I think I might have played with Robin in like mixed teams, like Fish 1, 2, 3 and stuff, but I never in a team, right? So for me, it was very new. And I think with Thomas, I probably would have played with him. I think I played with him before an endpoint at some point, but I didn't really know him that well, I don't think anyway. But yeah, it was kind of like a start of like a new friendship, and everyone was friends in the team, and it kind of reminded me of when I first started CS:GO. Everyone got along. It wasn't a chore to come on and play. Like even during like COVID or whatever it was, like we were just grinding like every single day. We was playing CS, playing best of threes, and it was like a really fun experience for me.
Oh, that's actually that's really interesting that with the IGL, it's like I think with some people when like if you kind of look at Thomas now, he was like, I want to pick this up, but you were forced into it. So like how did you like even just the confidence of your calls? Like as an IGL, you have to be so confident. You have to be very like
Yeah.
in your you have to be like you say it, it happens, you believe that. How did you kind of get to that level of believing? And also who would you have maybe taken inspiration from to help yourself build up or like help did you ask help from anyone?
So the way that it kind of happened with Call-In was it was like after it was after we had Impulse and AVN, and I was talking to Ads, obviously one of the owners of Endpoint. I was like, I was like, we need a new caller. He's like, and we couldn't. We were trying to brainstorm like who could we get because we weren't like uh, that recognized as an org. I don't think at the time. Like we weren't this
Yeah.
like talent producing powerhouse sort of thing. Everyone just thought of us as a UK team, so it was very hard to get anyone to sort of want to join. And then Ads was just like, yeah, well, you have to IGL. I was just like, haha, haha, yes. And then here we are, right? So that's kind of what happened. But yeah, in terms of IGLing, it's really difficult because I think that if you look at, I've always had this belief that like other scenes and other, people that you sort of think nowadays who's a top IGL. You know, you have Carrigan, you've got Snappy, you've got Cadian, you've got like all these people that I feel like how did they learn? And the only thing I keep thinking is like they would have had probably people that they played with that they learned from, right? But for me, I didn't really play with people that I learned from. I did it right at the start. I had like Imi, who was my IGL, and I played a Rattlesnake in one team, right? So like those were like the two IGLs that I played with in my career. So I obviously learned some from them, but like in terms of really going like into the game and understanding like macro and micro stuff and like how to do calls and like good calls and understanding when to do things, like it was all kind of learning it on my own, so it was like a very difficult subject because it's like I don't know if I'm doing good or bad, right? So I was like kind of asking the guys like, is this good? It's like, yeah, it's good. I was like, all right, cool, like I'm doing good, right? Or like we'll win games, so I feel like if we win games I'm doing good, right? So it was very much a trial and error when it came to IGLing. But at the same time, I think the guys helped me quite a lot because Robin was also a caller, so he was quite a big voice in the team. And then obviously the guys were more experienced than I was, so like Surreal was more experienced, obviously Crucial, Joey was more experienced. I think even to a degree, like me and Thomas were like the least experienced in the team, right? And they just brought me in to be a caller, so it was like we kind of as a group of friends, like we tried to make the best of everyone, trying to get everyone's strengths in the team. And yeah, I don't honestly, I don't know what happened, but here we are. So
Okay, that's really because like that point about like when you're saying like you look at the other scenes and it's like okay, this guy would have just played with this IGL and then he learned from that. Was that so that there's like kind of two parts? Was that because there just is no IGLs in the UK, and especially with like Valorant coming in, like it got reduced even further, or is that almost like this whole issue we have and had, especially in the UK scene, of like the lack of trickle down knowledge and like the treehouse effect that we had in the UK team? Which one is it? Is it maybe a mix of both,
it's,
or
it's both
yeah?
for me. Like when I was coming up through the UK scene, um, there was like a handful of IGLs.
Okay,
There was Imi, who I played with. There was Red Snake, who was always with like Team Infused, who were like they're always seen as like a in UKCS like a team above us, Team
yeah,
Infused. And then there was no Rattlesnake, there was no, I think Shiki would be considered one of these IGLs as well. So it's like Imi, Red Snake, and Shiki, and that was it. Like at least from what I can recall. And it was like when I was coming through, like that was it. And then I played with Rattlesnake because he came back to play it, and I was like, holy shit, this guy can call, like this guy knows what he wants. And then when that didn't happen, like that team kind of fell apart, and then that's when the first Endpoint team was made. It was like late 2016 or maybe early 2017, I don't remember. But then from that point, it was like, who are the IGLs in the UK scene? And then it was like, okay, well, I don't think there was any. It was kind of when I became an IGL. That's when I noticed that Adam was an IGL, right? And then in some of the more newer times, it's like you have people like Docs, right? God, who else is a caller? I can't,
artist.
artist, yeah, he does a good job. Like you have these newer faces that like I didn't know any of these people like a couple of years ago, right? So yeah, I think that's very much the main thing. In terms of trickle down knowledge, like that, and that's part of the problem inherently with not having IGLs, right? It's because that who do you talk to? Like I try and be available now. I know that obviously Mezzy tries to be available for questions. Like Ash from Gamer Legion, he tries to be available. Like we're not these people that sort of lock ourselves away and you can't contact us. Like
Yeah.
we're happy to help. It's just that like we're not going to go out of our way to help people. Like we're not going to approach people that need help first. Be like, oh, do you want our help? Because it's not, we're like way too busy for that stuff. Um, so yeah, I think that they both go hand in hand, but definitely like in terms of IGLs, like it's really hard to remember a point where like all these players were learning from IGLs to become better IGLs, where I don't think that was ever the case.
Okay, that's actually yeah, that's really interesting. I guess there's been such a big difference now, and I like for some reason now every player in the UK sees an IGL, like Mezzy, Thomas, you
Yeah.
guys, like it's all gone from 0 to 100. But before we start talking about like this crazy talent agency endpoint that you guys seem to be like gods at like picking people out, I want to talk about like your and Surreal's position in the team because I don't think Shushan will mind me quoting this. I was talking to him yesterday and he was saying how like he couldn't see a team where both you and Surreal in it worked, but then he played with you guys and he was like, oh my God, this works perfectly. Like this system is amazing. Could you kind of like break that down for us and explain how maybe like you take a back seat and allow for your superstars to shine, and from the outside you kind of, it's like, oh, like these two guys don't have as much impact in the server, and then you see it in this like the team, and it's completely different.
Yeah, so I mean, it's hard to really explain how we play. Like the first time we, I mean, even from day one of like the modern endpoint, right? Like back in sort of 2020, at the start of 2020, it was like I knew, like, oh, it's my first time being in IGL. I was like, okay, well, like, how do I want to do things, right? I was like, I don't know. I have no idea how I want to do things. So we kind of, my philosophy has always been like, let's build the team together. Like, it's not my project. It's not like the orgs project. Like, it's the team. There's a whole team building situation going on. And it was like, okay, like I was like to Joey, to Crucial, like, what do you want to do? I like doing this. Okay, Robin, what do you like to do? I actually like playing like this. I was like, okay, well that makes sense. How can I make this work together? And that's always pretty much what I've been doing. And then when we like to the more recent times, it's been like, for example, when we first got FlameZ, it was like, how does this guy fit into our team? Like, what role does he need? He needs this role. Okay, well, that means that either me or Kaya have to move our roles, or like adapt, right? And I was like, and I was like, do you want to do that? It's like, yeah, it's fine. So like we're like quite adaptable players. We don't want to play the star positions, but if it needs to be done, we'll do it, or we have to play like anchor roles, right? And we're happy to do so. So we accommodate everyone depending on like who we pick up in the team, right? That's kind of like the main idea, is like we're very flexible players, but we also try and be like really good teammates, set them up, explain like how we like to do things, explain how would you approach the situation, like talk to players and figure out, whilst trying to improve them as well is obviously quite important.
Mm.
But try and be just nice teammates, and like people want to play with you, right? Like you don't want to play with a guy that's constantly baiting you, or he'll never flash for you, like, and do you know what I mean? Like, so we always trying to be accommodating, and obviously we provide like a level of experience in terms of teams and like team CS, so I don't know if that explains a lot of it, but
I
that's
think
kind
it
of
does,
what
yeah.
what I'm thinking anyway. Yeah.
Yeah, because I think it's really interesting just seeing how these teams work. And before we talk about like the superstars coming in, I want to talk about RossR, because I think people just don't value him as much. Like in the UK scene, I feel like he's
Yeah,
got a
it's
pretty good
crazy.
rep. But outside the UK scene, I firstly don't think anyone would actually know who he is, which is like because he plays that like unsung hero role of, now he's not like a coach, he's not like there behind you guys, he's a manager, but he is behind you guys a lot. So could you just talk me through like what he does for you guys now and how he's changed throughout the time, and like how important he is?
Ross isn't in Endpoint anymore for like over a year, so
Oh, sorry, like before,
that's
like yeah.
um so in the like the modern Endpoint, we brought Ross on, because we were just looking for a coach. Like, simply, we put out like a tweet, I think, as Endpoint, and we're like, a coach, we need one, basically. And I'm pretty sure I spoke to Ross previously, because in like the old Endpoint, where it was more of like a 5-man UK team,
Mm,
I spoke with Boaster and Ross as like a partnership, right? Because Boaster has always been an IGL. Obviously,
yeah.
he's in Valorant now with Fnatic. But him and Ross were like closely linked in CS. So like Ross
Mm,
always wanted to be with Boaster. So I spoke with them. I kind of knew who Ross was from this point. So when we got him in 2020, I was like, okay, this is going to be good. But I had no idea kind of how smart he was. I didn't know him that well, but I knew kind of what he was in CS. And then it turned out that he was like this all-star coach that could do managerial stuff. He could talk to players. He had everything. But obviously, he didn't influence how we played in the game so much. But he could really point us in the right direction in terms of evidence, or like stats of 4v5s, pistol rounds, you name it on HLTV. If there's a stat, he could provide it for us in a way that made sense, right? Like, and we could fix it because we're the players, right? We knew how to fix this stuff, so he kind of let us do what we wanted to do. But like when we first had like this inkling of, we're going to sell someone, or what, I think the first one must have been Thomas to Envy, and we're like, okay, this is happening. So what are we going to do? And it was like, well, I sat down with Ross, and he's like, we kind of analyzed a lot of these like free agent players, and then we picked out FlameZ. And I don't remember exactly how it happened, but we ended up watching him, and it was like Ross, you need to get this guy, and then we got FlameZ, and that was that. So I was really impressed with how professional Ross was. But yeah, he's very much like a voice in the shadow now. I don't think many people know who he is. But he did join Fnatic, so he's in. I can say that much, I think. So yeah, he is a very professional person, and like it was a very nice time being an endpoint with him. Like he was like kind of our coach, but like, kind of a manager as well. So it was kind of
Yeah.
a it was weird to like label him as that, but like you could talk to him every day and it would be fine, you know. But he had like a very sort of professional side to him as well. So
Yeah. Oh, that's yeah. And then so speaking about FlameZ, like you were saying, you kind of just stumbled across him. How would you bring someone in and climatize him, especially like culturally as well? Like he's Israeli born and bred. He played like in the Danish. He played Singularity for like a couple games,
yeah.
and then you come into Endpoint. It's a UK team. How would you climatize him culturally to like you guys, and also just like playing your CS and enabling and bringing out the true potential of someone like FlameZ?
I don't know. Really, there was no kind of like instruction of how to do it, right?
Yeah,
Because
naturally.
um, it was just, I don't know. It was the first time that we'd really done something like this, where we'd made a roster change and brought someone in who was obviously so young as well. And obviously for us as English speakers, it was like we didn't know how well he would fare, right, being from Israel. But like I don't know, like I don't feel like we did that much to sort of facilitate him in terms of like culturally in the team. Like he just is. I don't know if you ever spoke to FlameZ, but he's a
Yeah, he's
very,
very outward going.
you know, he's very energetic. You know, you could be playing a 9 a.m. game and he's up, you know, he's up at 8:50. 10 minutes before the game, and he's just like bouncing around the room, you know, like there was nothing that I could have done to make him be like
Yeah.
that, you know. But in terms of like the team, it was, I think a lot of it, to Ross's credit, was before he joined. Like he really had like profile breakdowns of players and what he thought they would be in terms of like, are they an aggressive rifler, are they a passive rifler? And then we agreed, me and Ross, that we need an aggressive rifler. And then FlameZ fit his kind of blueprint profile, right? So we knew he was the right type of player, but it was more so how do we get the best out of him, and it was just making sure that he's comfortable. You know, like we were a team of really close friends, so we kind of brought them into our circle. You know, we'd have jokes. You know, we would involve them in like playing, you know, face its after prac or whatever it was. You know, like we try and involve everyone in the team. When it came to team decisions, everyone's involved. I'm not calling all the shots. I'm not saying everything for the team. Like
Mm.
everyone's involved, and it makes everyone be on the level playing field. I watched one of his interviews recently with Banks,
Oh
and he was
yeah.
saying that the main thing actually was, which I think is completely fair, obviously, which is why we did it. Not that I'm a part of the contract negotiations or anything, but when I think of what happened to a lot of players when they first join a team, where like they're the plus one to a four-man team, right? They often get a worse contract. But in Endpoint, we offered him exactly the same contract as everyone else. You know, we weren't going to be like, oh, well, he's this unknown guy from Israel that, you know, we don't know him or whatever. Let's put him on like a much worse contract. It was like, no, this guy's part of our team. Let's put him on the same contract, right? And I think for him that was a big sign of like respect and stuff. So that might have been where it kind of kickstarted it from the get go. That's like stage one, right? It's just contract negotiations. But yeah, outside of that, just being nice teammates, involving him in styles of play, like, you know, FlameZ, what do you want to do? Oh, actually, I want to do this. Yeah, let's do it. You know, like I don't care if you want to do that. Let's do it. Let's try it out. And being that way, rather than trying to dictate everything that a player should do and try and teach them my way of playing. You know, it's not for me to sort of impose on someone. So I think that's the kind of the main couple of reasons why. But yeah, I'd have to talk to him to find out more.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, yeah, completely. And obviously you guys did a good job because it like like you guys as a team leveled up. However, this then started a kind of like a vicious cycle of you finding someone,
Yeah.
them being poached, restart. How did you, as like maybe just as an individual, keep on being like, oh, here we go again, like here we're resetting, and like the motivation to just almost like not be restarted because it's not the whole team, but it's like a big core of the team and projects just going over and over and over again. Like with you guys are still kind of in that. Like you've had Boros, Nerds, and then whatever the first or MHL stuff was, and then now with like this newer squad, like it's still that kind of like same mentality of like bring someone in and building up, like, is it hard for you mentally just to be like, here we go again?
It definitely was at the start, and I want to shout out Ross because I think every time it happened, I'd talk to Ross and I'd be like, Ross, what do we do here? Like,
Yeah.
I was like, we've lost Flames. Who are we going to get? And he's like, we got Mezzy. I was like, how have we got Mezzy? Like what have we got Mezzy? And then it's like, he always had the answer, or an answer to the problem,
Yeah.
which obviously we struggle with now that he's gone. But I still talk to him when I can. But yeah, like he was a big reason why like it was manageable. But obviously for any player, it's tough. Like you you reach heights, in some teams, and then you're like, oh, next season is going to be the season, right? Like we finally got the foundation down, and day one of player break, boom, he's gone, or something stupid. It's like okay,
Yeah.
and then like your player breaks cut short because you need to find a team, like a player, obviously, and then practice with them. So then it's like you end up getting owned two times over because you have no break as well, right? So like it's a very hard thing to manage. But I think the more it happens, the more you learn on what to do or what to prioritize, right? You don't have this trial and error constantly of like what players should we get? Should we pack with them? What like in terms of this like the team stage of involving them in the team, that you're able to streamline it. So like now when we find a player, I'm like, okay, I know exactly what to do, and then we can be ready in like a couple of weeks, right? More so less than like before it'd be like a couple of months, but it's like we know what to do to be quicker on the pulse with being ready as a team.
Yeah. And I'd actually really love to get your take on this because when you guys started like almost signing these like random players, this was just not a thing in Counter Strike. It's like crazy international teams wasn't as big, but like obviously now in tier one, you look at any team and it's like, what is this? But I guess it makes sense because the roles
Mm.
fit. Do you feel like you like I don't know if you've ever thought about it this way, but like if you have the mentality of like and you spearheaded this mentality of it doesn't matter where they're from as long as they fit the team, and Endpoint are actually almost like the people who started this.
I don't really have a strong opinion on which way it goes. I think there's pros and cons to either of them. I think inherently a big problem with international teams always going to be communication.
Yeah,
It's just never going to be as fluent as five
naturally.
nationality, like five domestic people talking together, right? But that's the only downside. I mean, if they're good enough, if they have the work ethic, if they're nice teammates, if they have like a good enough English to speak with each other, then I think obviously teams like Ents prove that, right? Teams like Vitality prove that. Like it's not these results can't happen out of nowhere. But yeah, like we were kind of one of the first people to do it. I think there was like a handful of teams that were kind of doing similar things as us, but like in terms of like the sort of the publicity, I guess, of where people are now, and it's like, oh, they were an Endpoint. That's kind of always what gets said. But now you have like Flames on Vitality, right? You've got Nerds on Ents, like you have Boros who's on Team Falcons now, although it's not kind of to the same degree as um, Flames or Nerds, but the conversation is always there. Um, and even MHL, obviously. But yeah, I don't know whether we like spearheaded it, but like I think it's just the way CS went. Like
Yeah,
people were just trying to find the next gem, and obviously like, then after this happened, I think the We Play Academy started. So then all these tier one orgs just like sucked up all the face it players, all the people that were on leaderboards. It was like very, very difficult to sort of find these new players. But I think it is still possible, obviously. You have a lot of Russian teams, Ukrainian teams with all these emerging talents. You have some European talents that aren't on these like academy teams and stuff. It just made the process a whole lot harder. That's all it was.
yes, and I guess that is something that potentially came apparent in like 2022 when you would so that like point of you saying harder. You guys, I think this was in my perspective maybe like like the lower points of Endpoint when you were changing rosters quite a lot, and it never really stuck with like Kiebi, Fessor, even Regin as a coach, MHL Orping. Like was firstly like was the ability to find players, like how much was this directly affected by, as you were saying, teams sucking up all those like Flames nerds type people? Did that make it harder to just find anyone?
I do think it did, but I think at the same time, our our objectives as an org and as a team sort of shifted from where they used to be. Whether that's for better or for worse, it's up for people's opinion. But before we kind of felt like we were always underdog teams. We should always search for new talent rather than
Yeah.
ones that have already been proven, right? And then we got put in this spot where like we were qualifying for Pro League. Again, I think it was last year, right? So we qualified for Pro League, and we're like, okay, well, we're at kind of a crossroads with the team. Do we maintain the sort of the normal endpoint? Do we maintain this sort of try and maintain like 3 UK European players, or do we have to, do we try and get players are who are obviously talented, but they're not these FlameZs, Nertses, whatever you want to name them. Like they're not those sort of players, but they're more proven already, right? But they're still good players. So that's where we got Kirby, obviously a major MVP, but he hadn't played in a couple of years, so we didn't really know what. Like even for me, like I was like, how the hell have we got Kirby? I didn't believe it. I was just like, okay, like
It was
I
so
guess
random. I was like, who?
yeah.
How?
We had a discussion, and it was like, do we have a list of players? We go through the list, and it was like, yeah, Kirby, and then we just kind of moved on. And then the next day, it was like, we've got a call with Kirby. I was like, okay, we'll see how this goes. I was just like kind of sitting there like, okay, well, if this happens, it happens, right?
Mm.
But yeah, that was it was a very good experience though, playing with those sort of players, because you learn a lot about yourself and also from their experiences, rather than constantly being the one to sort of teach people. Like I was actually learning stuff from them. It was like kind of this weird point in my career. But
Yeah.
yeah, I like, obviously it didn't turn out too well overall, which is why kind of now we've gone back to the more traditional endpoint with like UK majority and stuff. But it was definitely an experience. Yeah, I'll leave it as that.
Yeah. And uh, so like recently we've seen UKCS rise up, and after being at the forefront for this region for so long, did it kind of like hurt you and the team to have Nerds leave during the RMR qualifiers? You guys have that troubles. Viperion, ITB, they made the RMRs. ITB make top eight. They're now like the UK team. Did it hurt to kind of watch from the sideline a little bit and be like, oh, we couldn't achieve this and go?
Yeah, I mean, it was like a mixture of emotions. Like I was happy for the ITB guys because I knew
Yeah.
some of them, right? Uh, Obviously Joey, Thomas, I knew them. Um, so yeah, I was happy for them, but at the same time, I was like, man, like how much I would have loved to have been, even at the
Mm.
major, because we really thought we were going to make it to the major, and it was like the day before the qualifier, like the night before the qualifier, like Ents were like, yeah, we want Nerds, and I was like, are you joking? I was like, the night before the qualifier, and it turns out we could have used Nerds the whole qualifier, but we didn't know, and I was like, I was so mad. But obviously that's just how CS goes sometimes, right? Like we literally spent 6 months preparing for the RMR qualifiers, and it was like it was the night before the qualifiers that Ents decided actually we want to buy Nerds again. And I was like, cool, okay, we're screwed. Like that's that. Like and then yeah, obviously after this, like ITB qualified, like even Viperion qualified. That was obviously a big shock for a lot of people, but um, just to see the UK doing well was obviously it was nice to watch, but obviously it sucked at the same time because we felt like we deserved the chance to try and compete there, right? But it's just like stuff that's outside of our control happened, and it's like you have to just move on, right? That's just the way it is.
Yeah, I'm not gonna lie, that's so shit. Like that's actually so rough. That like I can imagine how hard that would have been. But now with this new roster, like looking at the Azubu, Slen, Frog pickup, also even Stoic, shout UKCS go. He was once part of us. This is a weird roster because I am so cautiously optimistic. You've got Frog who has, let's be honest, not much experience. Azubu, not much experience. Slend has got a little bit more. Like I think he's won a CCT. Like they have actually played at a decent level with Mouse NXT,
Yeah.
but like this is a big risk, right? I feel this is a big just reset. So you're going back to, I can imagine you changing back your philosophy. So you're going back to this, like we're taking up players who are unproven. Why did you like reset that mentality?
I think it was so not it wasn't just my decision, of course, but I think the organization wanted to do it because
Yeah.
it felt like Endpoint had gone away from what it once was, in terms of a blueprint of what Endpoint was. Our last team wasn't that, I think everyone can say that who followed Endpoint. And the org just wanted to. Oh, and with CS2 coming out, in the foreseeable future, um, it was kind of a point where for them it was like just let's go back to what we were, right? Because we know this worked at some point, like this sort of like recipe, whatever you want to say it is. I was happy to do that with them. And like we said earlier in the talk, that there's now actually UK players that we would want to pick up, right? So it
Yeah.
made sense. It was like, okay, well, if we can get a Zubu, let's do it, right? Like, and we kind of reset our expectations. Let's like realign ourselves with what Endpoint is, and let's go from there because we know we can do it. We've done it before, right? And I think that's kind of the only reason why it happened. But yeah, we're very excited to play with this lineup. It's a very different feel to it. A lot of younger players. Even Heavy God is still really young, right? So it's kind of
Yeah.
weird. Like the average team age just drops instantly, and it's like people that are hungry to play, and like it's kind of a different feeling because it's like you said, like it's like some experience and then not so much experience, but then like together we know that we've done it before, so we can do it again, right?
Yeah. And I'm guessing the major being so far away is that like almost being like, okay, we can make mistakes now.
Yeah,
We can get like all these guys to this level. Is that like a big part of why as well you guys were able to reset?
yeah, I think so.
Yeah.
I think having this sort of distant goal being the major, obviously, but it's like relatively far away. Obviously, like
Yeah.
only at the start of next year, but in terms of CS, that's like a lifetime.
Yeah.
But yeah, like that obviously is the goal for us, is to try and qualify for the RMR or the major, obviously. But yeah, it being so far away, it gives us more room to sort of um, try the old recipe, right? Like try and get everyone up to speed. Can we facilitate them? Can we teach them enough of the game? Can they produce like their own world class ability, like flames and nerds and stuff, right? That's kind of the whole point. Um, but I'm looking forward to it because it's been even a couple of weeks we've started. Like it's been really fun to play.
Yeah. I mean, like it seems like a really cool team. And I think with like I can't wait to see you guys progress personally. And so just like kind of final thing, talking about CS2, you said it was right around the corner. With obviously the UK scene shifting quite a lot, as you as an individual, what do you see your role in the UKC being? Like, do you, and with especially the BCSA, like it's at its best point right now. Do you feel like you are going to be at quite like a leadership role in the UK scene coming into this new era?
I mean, I think it's inherent with the role that I play in the game. I think that, like I said earlier, like the sort of trickle down knowledge and like being someone that people can talk to and like talk about CS with. Like I think that's so
Mm,
important, and I think inherently the people that are AGLs kind of become that in their scene, right? Like um, I think even Mezzi will be that, but like the kind of the people that are trying to do so right now will obviously be the people doing it in the future, but it'll like be people, even people like artists will probably do it. The IGLs and these like in Viperio, obviously Ash in Gamer Legion, Mezzi, me, like even Adam, I think tries to help out people. I think it's going to be like a collective effort to try and sort of be these figures in the scene. But I think yeah, it's definitely going to be needed because otherwise it really does hurt the scene in terms of progression and just keeping the scene afloat essentially is what it
yeah.
is, and trying to make it somewhere that TOs want to put tournaments, orgs that want to support teams. I think it's so important, so important.
Yeah, I mean, well, hopefully as well, we see the UK scene driving up even more and more. And Max, honestly, it's been a pleasure talking to you. I can't wait to see how this endpoint roster progresses. I feel like it's got so much potential. So, without further ado, thank you so much for joining me, and I wish you the best with everything in going forward in the team and everyone as well. Thank you so much, and I'll see you next week for another episode on the INSITE channel.